Let me first thank Steve Werp for organizing this and for every single one of you for attending this. This is just a remarkable enterprise to have Christians and others around the world who are expressing their support for the nation of Israel and expressing their shared pain for the exile of the people of Israel, for the destruction of the temple. The yearnings of the people of Israel are your yearnings. It's a remarkable time. We are seeing and experiencing things in the relationship between Jews and Christians that our ancestors could never have even imagined. I won't even say they dreamed about them, because it was even beyond something that they would dream about. It just seemed impossible to them, I'm sure, to have the type of friendship and solidarity and shared yearnings and shared pain and shared joys between Jews and Christians. It's really a beautiful thing. So what I want to focus on this Tisha B'Av is the long, dark exile. I don't want to focus on the destruction of the temple. That is, of course, what the anniversary is. But the way we in the Jewish community observe Tisha B'Av and the meaning that we infuse Tisha B'Av with is not only about the destruction of the temple, but it's about everything that emerged from the destruction of the temple, all of the results of the destruction of the temple, all of the dominoes that fell as a result of the temple falling. Meaning the thousands of years, the century upon century of this dark and difficult exile that the nation of Israel went through. And on Tisha B'Av in the synagogue, besides reading the book of Lamentations from the Bible, we also read many other poems of lamentation that were written throughout the ages, and many of them commemorating specific events that befell the Jewish people, including, for example, the massacres of Jewish communities in Europe at the hands of crusaders who were killing the Jews in the name of Jesus, sadly and tragically. And everyone on this call is aware of the history of the mistreatment of Jews by Christians in the name of their misguided understanding of their faith, their misunderstanding of their faith, we could say. And unfortunately, most Christians today still are not aware. But what I want to focus on in my talk is the Jews who survived this long and difficult exile. I often say that we don't have enough reverence for the average Jew living at some point 200, 500, 1,000, 1,500 years ago, who just persevered and had faith that the exile would end and that the nation of Israel would come home. The Jew who every Passover and every Yom Kippur, every Day of Atonement, said next year in Jerusalem, and said it with great faith and believed it with all their heart. And the reason I say that we must have reverence for these people is that, we live today at a time where the nation of Israel is ingathered to our land in great numbers. We have a state of Israel. So much has changed, or I should say, so many prophecies have been fulfilled. So much of the redemption, we're not there yet. The temple is not rebuilt. We're not at the end of the story. But we have seen so much movement in the story of the redemption of the nation of Israel, in the story of the fulfillment of God's biblical promises, that it's easy for us to have faith that this will continue. Yeah, we don't always know how exactly it's going to happen and what our role is. We try our best to figure it out. But we can have a confidence. We've seen promises fulfilled by God. But what about those Jews who lived throughout all those centuries? Imagine living in the 7th century, the 10th century, the 15th century, and seeing a world in which you've been in exile basically forever. Everyone around you, Christian and Muslim, is telling you you're never going back. And it's been going on century after century after century, and there's no visible movement toward a redemption. And yet these Jews kept the faith. They honestly believed with all their heart and all their soul that this was going to happen. And they passed the baton of that faith to the next generation. And I look back And I marvel at these people, and I have reverence for them. And I know that no one in our community, the Jewish people, would not be here today without all of those regular Jews who kept the faith and the redemption going for so long. And that's something that we need, that I want to appreciate on this Tisha B'Av. And I want to share with you two documents that speak to the long, difficult exile and the Jews who persevered through that exile. Two documents that I want to share with you. And maybe you've heard me quote them before, because I have quoted each of these documents in different contexts. I've never put them together in a conversation. And for some of you, this is brand new. The first document I want to share from you is a letter written in the 13th century. And this letter was written by Rabbi Moses Nachmanides. He was the greatest rabbi of his time, both the greatest scholar of Jewish law, as well as the greatest as the greatest Bible commentator, the greatest philosopher of his time in Jewish theology, the greatest mystic. He was also a medical doctor. Not Maimonides, Nachmanides. He lived 2 generations after Maimonides. And he was the leader of the Jewish community in Spain in the middle of the 13th century. Now, Rabbi Moses Nachmanides left Spain for the land of Israel late in life. He had famously been forced to engage in a public defense of Judaism in the court of the Spanish king. And he was granted permission by the king to speak freely without fear of being arrested for heresy. And he had to defend Judaism against a Christian interlocutor that he had to debate. And in that debate, Nachmanides proclaimed what still stands today as the greatest defense of Judaism. And it's published. You can read the Disputation at Barcelona, it's called. Now, despite the royal dispensation to speak freely, which meant, of course, speaking in defense of Judaism and against Christian belief at the time, the debate left Nachmanides no real choice. And after the debate, especially because he kind of won, he had to leave. So not long after that debate, he decided to fulfill his life's dream. And at the age of 73, he embarked on the long and dangerous journey to the land of Israel. Now understand that the 13th century was no picnic for Jerusalem. The Sixth Crusade in 1228, the subsequent Muslim razing of the city in 1244, followed by the Seventh Crusade in 1250, and then the Mongol and Tatari invasion in 1260. All of these invasions involved massacres and destruction of Jerusalem. And what I've just shared with you is only in the span of about 35 years. It was a very difficult century. The 13th century was a difficult century for Jerusalem. The land of Israel was a war zone that kept changing hands. Now, this is the Jerusalem that Rabbi Moses Nachmanides arrived in 1267. Upon arrival, he wrote a letter to his son back in Spain. And we have the text of that letter today, and I translated it into English, and I'd like to read it to you. And here it is. May God bless you, my son Nachman, and may you see the good of Jerusalem. May you see children of your children, and may your table be like the table of Abraham our father. In the holy city of Jerusalem, I write this letter to you, for with praise and thanks to the rock of my salvation, I merited to arrive peacefully on the 9th day of the month of Elul, and I stayed in her, in Jerusalem, in peace until the day after Yom Kippur, after which I am now planning to travel to Hebron, city of the graves of our fathers, to pray there and to dig a burial site for myself there with God's help. What can I tell you regarding the land? For there is much neglect and the desolation is great. The general rule is as follows. That which is holier is more destroyed. Jerusalem is more destroyed than anything else. Judea is more destroyed than the Galilee. But Jerusalem, with all of her destruction, is very good. It has approximately 2,000 inhabitants, around 300 Christians among them, refugees from the Sultan's sword. There are no Jews in her, for ever since the Tatars invaded, they fled from there, and others were killed by the sword. except for 2 brothers, dyers of wool. They purchased the dyes from the magistrate. These 2 brothers are joined by a group of up to a quorum of 10 men for communal worship in their home on the Sabbaths. Behold, I encouraged them, and we found a destroyed house built with marble pillars and a beautiful dome, and we took it as a synagogue, for the city's abandoned. Anyone who wants to acquire a destroyed building may do so. They volunteered to repair the house. They took the initiative and sent to Shechem to bring Torah scrolls from there that were from Jerusalem, but were taken to Shechem when the Tatars invaded. Behold, they have now established a synagogue, and there they will pray. For many people come to Jerusalem regularly, men and women from Damascus and Aleppo and all of the regions of the land, to see the temple site and to cry over it. He who granted me to see Jerusalem in its state of destruction will grant us to see it rebuilt and established when the glorious presence of God returns to it. May you, my son, and your siblings and the entire family, all of you, merit seeing the good of Jerusalem and the comfort of Zion. Your worried and rejoicing father, Moses Nachmanides. P.S. Send my greetings to Rabbi Moses, son of Solomon, your mother's brother. I hereby tell him that I went up to the Mount of Olives, which is opposite the Temple Mount and adjacent to it. Only the valley of Jehoshaphat separates them. And there, opposite the holy temple, I read his verses, his poetic verses that he composed with much weeping, as he foresaw. May he who caused his name to dwell in the holy temple increase and expand your peace with the peace of your entire honored and holy community forever and for eternity. Amen. That's the letter. Just imagine. He arrived in Jerusalem and there were only 2 Jews there. And notice that he mentions in the letter that he sent to Shechem, which is Nablus, it's called in Arabic, in Samaria, to bring Torah scrolls that were originally from Jerusalem that had been taken to Shechem, to bring them back. And they had been taken to Shechem when the Tatars invaded. The Tatars invaded less than 10 years before he arrived there, which means that before the Tatars invaded, there was a community in Jerusalem. There were Torah scrolls. There was a synagogue functioning. But now all the Jews fled or were killed, and these 2 brothers stayed there, and they were joined periodically by others to pray. Well, here's what happened. That synagogue was founded, and Jews started moving back to Jerusalem. There was news that there was a community again. Jews started moving back. And a couple hundred years later, the synagogue moved location to its current location. And currently in the old city, in the middle of the old city, there is that large synagogue in the middle of the old city. Many of you have been to Jerusalem, have seen it, the Churva synagogue. But right next to the Churva synagogue is a smaller synagogue. And it's called the Ramban synagogue. Ramban is the Hebrew acronym for Rabbi Moses Nachmanides. It's named after him. And it is the continuous community. It is the congregation that was founded at the moment of that he wrote about here. Ever since Rabbi Moses Nachmanides arrived in Jerusalem in 1267 to find 2 Jews there and started encouraging people to come back, the population of the city of Jerusalem has been growing ever since that moment. And because of this fact, and I thought of this when I first read the letter many years ago, I thought about the fact that those 2 Jews in Jerusalem, that brief few years between the Tatar invasion and Rabbi Moses Nachmanides arriving in Jerusalem was most likely the time in Jerusalem's history, from temple times till today, when there were the fewest Jews in Jerusalem. Because there was a continuous Jewish community there before, and there's, of course, been a continuous Jewish community there afterwards. And put that in perspective now. What that means is that if we were to look at the Jewish population of Jerusalem on a graph during this 2,000-year exile, the low point, the point at which it reaches the fewest Jews, and from there going forward, the number is only rising, the arrow's only pointing up, is the moment that Rabbi Moses ben Nachman arrives in Jerusalem and encourages those two brothers to start a synagogue. Here's what I'm saying. Listen carefully. What that means is that the story of the ingathering of the nation of Israel, of the rebuilding of Jerusalem that we are still in the middle of and enjoying so much, seeing Jerusalem get continuously built and growing and Israel getting stronger, the point where that begins, where do you start? Do you start with the Zionist movement? Do you start with Jews emigrating en masse in the 1800s? Where do you start the story? There's a lot of different spots where you can start the story, but you can't start it earlier than Rabbi Moses Nachmanides arriving in Jerusalem. It's from that point forward that the population in Jerusalem is growing, not shrinking forever. It really speaks to how long and deep this history really is. Now, I want to share with you a second document. And this second document is not written by a Jew. It's written it was from the year 1771. In the year 1771, the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica was published in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And I once had the opportunity to see a copy. I actually got to see it a few times because my father-in-law owns a facsimile edition. It's not an original. That would be worth millions of dollars. And he doesn't have that. But it's a facsimile edition. It's an exact replica of the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, published in 1771. So when I saw this encyclopedia, and we're familiar with the Encyclopedia Britannica having 20 some volumes, it's only 3 volumes. Very interesting book. So when I saw this encyclopedia the first time, the first thing I did was I looked up the word Jew to see what it would say. What did these British intellectuals writing the first Encyclopedia Britannica in the 18th century, over 250 years ago, what did they write about Jews? And I found it was a total of about 150 words. It's a very short entry. And I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll comment. Jews, those who profess obedience to the laws and religion of Moses. When a modern Jew builds a house, he must leave part of it unfinished in remembrance that the temple and Jerusalem now lie desolate. They lay great stress upon frequent washings. They abstain from meat prohibited by Levitical law, for which reason whatever they eat must be dressed, meaning prepared, by Jews and after a manner peculiar to themselves. Every Jew is obliged to marry, and a man who lives to 20 unmarried is accounted as actually living in sin. The Jews, it is said, were formerly at the disposal of the chief lord where they lived, and likewise all their goods. A Jew may be a witness by our law by being sworn on the Old Testament and taking oaths to the government. Now, the last 2 sentences of that deal with the status of Jews under British law at the time. The opening sentence of it is those who profess obedience to the law and religion of Moses. That's just a general statement. And in the middle of it, we have the kosher laws. We have frequent washings, which might refer to washing our hands before we eat. It might refer to family purity and the ritual baths, a mikveh. But notice the very first descriptive line, after simply saying that we profess obedience to the law and religion of Moses, when these British intellectuals sat down to write an entry on about Jews, so they thought of the kosher laws, they thought that Jews marry at a young age and build families. That's true. That's also mentioned here. Frequent washings. But the very first practice that they mention of Jews is that when a modern Jew builds a house, he must leave part of it unfinished in remembrance that the temple and Jerusalem now lie desolate. Now that is, there are probably a lot of people on this call that didn't even know about that custom. It's a custom. When you're building a brand new house, you leave a piece of it unfinished because the temple's not rebuilt. It's a way to remember the temple. Now, what does this tell me? This was not written by Jews, this entry. And any of you, think about this. Imagine someone asked you to write an encyclopedia entry for the word Jew. and said, you only have 150 words. And you had to choose which details about the Jews are you going to include. The first thing at the top of the list describing the Jewish people, the first thing they wrote is that Jews remember the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This doesn't make me impressed by the British authors of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not my point at all. On the contrary, they were just writing what they were seeing. But what does it tell us about Jews at the time? What does it tell us about Jews at the time that when outsiders were thinking of the few details to include to describe the Jews, the first thing that came to their mind, the first thing they put down, the opening line, after saying that we profess adherence to religion of Moses, that we follow Judaism, the very first thing they said is that we mourn the temple in Jerusalem. The Talmud says that anyone who mourns Jerusalem will merit to see it rebuilt. And in the Jerusalem Talmud, it states homiletically that the Messiah will be born on the 9th of Av, which doesn't, these homiletic statements by the rabbis they're homiletic. They're not meant to be taken literally, but it's pretty clear what the rabbis meant by that. What they meant is that the mourning, the feeling of what is missing, if I forget that something's missing because we don't have a temple, because we're in exile during those years, because Jerusalem is desolate, because Jews felt that, and because they mourned over it, and because they commemorated it, because of Tisha B'Av, because of the 9th of Av, because of all that remembrance and being committed to that memory. Think of when this is written in 1771, 1,700 years, almost exactly, from the destruction, and to these British authors of the encyclopedia, the most notable thing that they could see when they looked at Jews was that they mourned the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. And that's why we're here today. It's only in the merit of these people. That is what it means that the Messiah is born on the 9th of Av. That it's that commitment, that remembering and that mourning for what is missing in the world, which is what drives us forward to reach for a time and to eventually reach a time where it will be rebuilt. The Messiah is born on the 9th of Av. He who mourns the destruction of Jerusalem will see it rebuilt. Not necessarily him, but his offspring, his descendants. Passing the baton of mourning for Jerusalem is also passing the baton to the next generation of the redemption itself. So here on Tisha B'Av, I'll leave you with this message. Think about those two Jews in the city of Jerusalem. Think about the Jews who would travel back to Jerusalem at a time it didn't even have walls when Nachmanides got there. The walls of Jerusalem we see today were built in the 16th century. In the 13th century, there weren't even any walls. It was a city without walls back then was dangerous. That's why there was barely anyone there. It was destroyed. It was destroyed 4 times in the span of 30 years in the 13th century. And these Jews stayed, and they came back, and they rebuilt. They rebuilt a synagogue, and more Jews joined them, and more Jews joined them. And that's how we made it here today. So again, my message to you is that we must have great reverence and appreciation, really reverence, for all of those Jews, all of those simple Jews throughout the centuries. We don't know the names of those brothers, those 2 brothers who were in the wool dyeing business. We have to have reverence for all of the Jews who carried the torch, who passed the baton of survival and perseverance, generation after generation, never losing faith, even though it seemed irrational. I mean, 2,000 years, but they never lost faith. And that should be a lesson to all of us. You know, with us, everything, I mean, if they could see our world, they would be overjoyed at the redemption. And we still are worried about, you know, if there's a headline that doesn't go our way, we're like, oh no. Let's remember that these Jews persevered through the darkest times and believed through the darkest times that we would be here today. And we owe them a great, great debt of gratitude. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for joining us in this remembrance, in this commemoration. And it is out of this remembrance and commemoration that we put another brick in the building of the temple, in the building of the next phase of the redemption. God bless you.